Good day and welcome to this edition of Focus on your public radio station in McMinnville, your non-commercial and decidedly non-profit public radio, WCPI 91.3. And this is Bill Zachman, and I want to welcome also our video guests today by way of Ben Lomond Connect and BLTV Community Channel 6. And just like WCPI, BLTV is focused on local issues in the several counties BLTV serves through Ben Lomond Connect. As we say, if you don't have Ben Lomond Connect, you don't got Channel 6. So welcome to our BLTV viewers. David Plazas is the opinion editor and the engagement director for the Tennessean newspaper, one of the great newspapers in America, and particularly a leader here in the South. Also with the USA Today Tennessee Network. David, I want to welcome you. Not the first time, you are a repeat visitor here on Focus on WCPI. And David just wrapped up a very successful presentation at the Rotary Club of McMinnville, also known as Noon Rotary, and he was talking about Civility, Tennessee. Civility, Tennessee, I think we have an idea of what those two words separately mean, but when you put them together, what is Civility, Tennessee? Give us the executive summary.
Sure, and thank you so much, Bill, for having me back. It's been a few years since I've been in McMinnville, and in many ways, McMinnville is what started Civility, Tennessee. We had a concept, but then we had to leave our bubble of Nashville, where I live in, to go out and start talking to community residents, Tennessee residents across the state, and it's been wonderful to do that. So what Civility, Tennessee is, it's a campaign to promote, encourage, and to model civil discourse, and also to turn the head on what people think about civility. It's not just about politeness. It's not just about acquiescence. It really is about active citizenship. And it's about getting people to understand the world around them, to connect with each other, especially at a time where we're seeing mass polarity because of politics, and to try to solve problems together. And we think over the last 4 years since I was first here in McMinnville, we have had a lot of headway in terms of getting people to realize that there's a necessity to be able to work together, at least understanding each other in some ways.
Okay. You've sort of laid out some dry kindling here. I'm going to light the match and set this thing on fire. In the last several years, and it may just seem to be amplified because maybe I've gotten more sensitive to it, but just the brutality, the toxicity, the poisoned environment for discussion of public issues. How did we get here? I mean, what has pushed us this far away from your idea, an ideal of civility in discourse? What got us here?
Sure. We've had uncivil behavior since the beginning of the Republic, when newspapers were criticizing politicians for all sorts of heinous crimes and acts. Over the last few decades, what we've seen is just a rapid growth of demonization, in part because it's easier to disseminate your voice, either because of social media or other channels. And in some ways, it's been profitable for people to be pundits who are screaming at each other. And that really is not healthy. That may be entertaining, but it doesn't solve problems. It doesn't create a process for helping people have a better education in public schools, or building sidewalks, or investing in public safety. And too oftentimes people get more worked up about the politics or about a particular politician than they do about their power as citizens to be able to affect change. I think that's part of it. And in part there's a lot of insecurities because in the last 20 years we have been essentially at war. We had the withdrawal from Afghanistan last summer, but literally for 20 years, especially young people in our community, they've known nothing but war. And at this time, we've seen that Russia's invaded Ukraine, so there's this tension that creates. There's been economic tension because of the Great Recession, because of the pandemic, and it's very easy to want to demonize the other to figure out, why is my life this way? Who caused this problem? Rather than say, how can I work with my neighbor to create a solution? That's the big challenge here, because it's something that is never ending. It's not something that you can fix here and it's done. In democracy, as we know, when Benjamin Franklin said, we have a republic if you can keep it, it's in that same vein. 240 plus years later, we still have to ask ourselves every single day, do we want to keep this democracy? You know, for me, the answer is yes.
Yeah. You mentioned that some of this hyper-partisan, over-the-top, exaggerated political rhetoric is profitable. I think that was the word you used. We have what we call infotainment. And it seems to me that there was some time in the past, not a discrete moment in history, but there was a time in the past when the great reputation that the American responsible media had, and you know, I grew up in an era of 3 major national network news channels, and you could go to the evening news on any one of those channels, and it would be believable, it would be credible, it would be sourced. You know, the presenters and anchors would show you this is where we got this information, take you to the scene of the action. And it seems to me like some people in the public conversation said, hey, there's a profit opportunity here. I can take that reputation that these media have worked so hard to build with honest, factual journalism. I can take this and pretend to be a journalist, pretend to know something about the subject, but instead feed just sometimes vicious, vitriolic propaganda to set off the dopamine in the brain for people who want to hear this stuff. You may remember that the late Rush Limbaugh, a very conservative media representative, had a vast following with his syndicated radio program. He said, to his credit one time, he said, people don't look at me as a real journalist. I'm not. I'm an entertainer. Have we gone to the point where some people mistake these for-profit propagandists as journalists?
You know, I think so. At the same time, because if you look at polls from Gallup or elsewhere, you know, the popularity of journalists is very low when it comes to a trusted source. Although very much it's like Congress. You know, if you look at Congress's reputation is extremely low. It's lower than journalists, believe it or not.
Yeah.
But people, about 90% of communities continue to elect their incumbent congressmen.
Right.
So they don't like Congress, but they like their own.
Right.
And so for me as a local journalist, it's really important to connect with people in my community, to see, oh boy, you shop with me, you attend the same religious services I do, I see you in the park when you're running. So you're a real person. Too oftentimes there's been a reputation of a journalist as being someone who looks down on the community, who may not be connected, who may come to parachute down.
The condescending, I know
Yes.
everything, you know nothing, listen to me,
Exactly.
your opinions don't matter.
Exactly, and especially when news gets nationalized. And a lot of our politics, even local politics, has been nationalized, be it with the critical race theory discussion or issues with regard to healthcare and learning and all these other things that are really fundamental. And I think it's a role of journalists to really try to get through that. But it's very difficult because if you've made up your mind about something, to persuade you otherwise is going to be almost impossible. But to at least ask you to consider, to open your mind to this thought is possible in my experience for the last couple of years. But it takes a lot of dedicated work to ask people that question. You know, are you willing to listen, and are you willing to tell me where you are? And are you willing to also consider a variety of facts that may challenge the facts that you think are true? And then I also, as a journalist, have to be willing to say, I have to keep an open mind as well. What if I'm wrong? You know, how can I ensure that I can make sure that I have sourced enough? And what if I do find information that's new? So, for example, the vaccine issue, we were asked about this during the Rotary Club, and there's been all sorts of guidance that has changed over the years. I can tell you that people have told me, like, I'm confused by the CDC guidance. Should we mask, should we not mask? And actually, I received the best comparison from one of the president's health advisors, who said the way we should treat a mask is like a raincoat. When it's raining, you put it on, and when it's not, you take it off. And so it's a really good way to look at it, rather than saying you must mask 100% of the time, where either because of frustration, maybe kids are not learning optimally, people are concerned about their liberty, and so you have to take that into account when you have these kind of public conversations. And government and journalists have to do a better job of explaining these things and helping people understand that sometimes data changes, sometimes things change.
That's the nature of science.
It is
the nature of science. So you're saying humility.
Mm-hmm.
Let's show humility. You also mentioned grace.
Yes.
Grace.
Yes. Yeah.
When you talk to Rotary, grace. Have grace.
This is something that I have to give credit to many of the guests on my podcast, Tennessee Voices. I asked people to talk about, would they leave some words of wisdom for the audience during this challenging time, and so many of them said, show grace in some way or the other. Show compassion, show mercy to other people, because you don't know what people are going through right now.
Yeah.
And many times, those of us who have platforms like myself, to be able to have some kind of influence, some kind of power, oftentimes need to step away and say, what do we need to understand about the other person? They may be screaming about something because there's something that really hurts them. And it's kind of that the fable of the lion and I think it was the mouse, where the lion has a nail up his foot.
Yeah.
And nobody knows why the lion is so angry. But at the end of the day, when the nail is taken off, then these animals can be friends again, because the issue was the pain that this lion was in. And for the overall nature, sometimes we don't know what people are going through. And when people feel disempowered, when they feel disenfranchised, they're going to do whatever they can, generally, either, number one, to completely disengage, or number two, to try to disrupt. And that can cause problems for maintaining our democracy.
Yeah. If you're joining us just a little late on today's Focus program on WCPI and on BLTV, I'm talking to David Plazas. I think I can say without fear of successful contradiction that David, who talks so graciously, is one of the most influential people in America, from his position as a journalist with one of the great American journalistic enterprises, USA Today, stationed at the Tennessean, where he also serves as opinion and engagement editor. I like that term, engagement. I know that you've been working on that, and we'll talk about that. I want to ask you this, David, in your illustrious career as a journalist, a multi-award-winning journalist, you did a lot of reporting on education. Mm-hmm. Let me ask you this: do our public schools have an obligation? Do they have a duty to teach critical and analytical thinking? Do they have the expectation that they'll turn out students who can think for themselves, think independently, who can analyze data, who can evaluate what passes as evidence? And if they have if they have that obligation, are we fulfilling that obligation? Mm-hmm. What do you think?
Yeah, I think we do have that obligation, and even if we were to look at it from my own opinion, which is yes, we need more critical thinkers, because as we found, even with the school to employment pipeline, what a lot of employers are looking for are people. We can teach you those skills. We can't always teach people how to think. We can't always teach people how to communicate. Children need that kind of education. They need to broaden their worldview, where they're exposed to multiple different types of texts. And you look at the Tennessee Social Studies standards, there are a variety of lessons, from issues such as slavery to issues as the beginning of statehood for Tennessee, that are addressed. And the question that we're going through right now in this state and also other states is, what is a divisive concept? So Tennessee in 2021 banned divisive concepts from being taught. There's a series of examples in the law. The term critical race theory is not in that law specifically, although lawmakers wrote an op-ed saying that that's the reason it was. But the fact is that has never been taught in K through 12. And that's concerning to me, because the question is, why would you ban something that hasn't been there in the first place? What is the problem? Yeah. It's an easy political target in many ways. At the same time, if we're going to talk about divisive concepts, we have to understand, what does that mean exactly? Does it mean things that make us uncomfortable? Things that, as some say, that maybe parents should be teaching at home? What if parents are ill-equipped to teach those lessons at home? We're going through a conversation right now in Tennessee about whether to make Juneteenth a state holiday. Mm-hmm. It's already a federal holiday. One state senator from Hohenwald essentially said that he doesn't know anybody who's ever heard of Juneteenth.
He said he polled 100 people, and 2 of them knew what June. I think that says more about his constituency and his base than it says about Tennesseans in general. But
and my point is, I agree with you, but my point is that maybe they never learned it. So because they were never exposed to this particular education, they wouldn't have known. Because I think oftentimes most people, in my experience, aren't malicious when it comes to these discussions. And I talked in the Rotary Club about fake news versus misinformation versus disinformation. A lot of times we're in an era where there's so much misinformation, where people believe something to be true because someone told them.
Yeah, and that's the point, David. Why do they believe in the absence of evidence or contrary to the evidence? Why do they believe?
It may be because it confirms something that they want to be true. It may be because a friend or family member told them. If we look at studies over the last couple decades over social media influence, people will believe their friends before they believe an institution because they have a relationship. And that's one of the things where journalists really have to deepen their relationships with the people in the community. Because if they don't trust us, because they don't know us. And in fact, the American Press Institute and Pew Center have both affirmed that only about a fifth of Americans have ever met a journalist. So for me, that's a huge, urgent wake-up call to say we need to be present in the lives of our community. People need to see us just as they see their firefighters, their doctors, their teachers. They need to see us like yourself, in terms of your involvement in the community. People may not agree with your politics, but they trust you as a person because they know your character. And that's what we need more of.
Back to Civility, Tennessee, you have several projects coming up, and I think you announced it here before the official announcement about Civility, Tennessee, teaming up with a couple of universities in Tennessee, and you're going to be taking a kind of a road show across Tennessee with candidate forums, candidates for governor and for congressional seats. So tell us what you are allowed to tell that's not embargoed at this point about
Sure.
that.
So this is building on what we did in 2018. In 2018, we held a series of forums that included locations in Memphis, in Jackson, in Nashville, and in several other places across Tennessee where we engaged gubernatorial candidates and also some other candidates as well. And I was in McMinnville actually that year as well for legislative candidates as well as the Democratic candidate for governor at that time. So this is building upon what we did and really leveraging some of the relationships we have. I'll be able to say a lot more in a couple of weeks in terms of details, but these are going to be open events to the public where we want people to ask questions and understand, why people are running. Do they represent their values, and are they good for their particular district? In this case, we're going to be focusing on the gubernatorial election and also the 9 congressional seats across the state. And we're still in the process of engaging those particular candidates. So my hope is that all will participate, and at the very least, we're going to create an opportunity for people to be illuminated. Because more than now, I think what we've learned in our work is that as an editorial board, especially, rather than telling people how to think, even though we may have an opinion on something, we want to present facts and help guide people. Whether we're talking about affordable housing or public education or a particular race, for the election, we want people to understand the facts and at the same time have as much information as they can so they can feel they're making a very good choice when it comes to election day.
Mm-hmm. Of course, from your position, you're a member of the editorial board at the Tennessean, and I think you told the Rotarians today that I think it's your predisposition to sort of move away from endorsing a candidate, but instead of that, presenting the candidate objectively, what the candidate stands for, what the candidate has announced her or his platform to be, and say, readers evaluate the facts, make up your own mind.
Yeah, and there is another level to it. There is a level where we still have to play the responsible broker. So if somebody sends in a guest opinion and is full of falsehoods, we cannot publish that.
Right.
We vet these claims, and someone can have an opinion, a strong opinion about some sort of policy, but if it's patently false or not true, we cannot run it, and we'll work with the author to say this cannot run unless this happens. So it's not just about presenting information for the sake of information. It's not about aggregating information, but it's about being a trusted broker, a trusted convener that will bring people together in a way that presents the facts, that is truthful, and that also allows for the public to be engaged.
Well, of course, that's been the raging debate with the online media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all of these platforms that have a provision, I would call it a carve-out, in the Federal Communications Commission law that basically says these platforms, these conduits, are not publishers and therefore not responsible for the content. They're just serving as a pass-through device. There are a lot of people in Congress, particularly conservatives and some of the progressives, that say this cannot stand. This has to change.
Mm-hmm.
What say you on that?
Sure. In fact, Senator Marsha Blackburn is one of the leaders in that in the Senate, along with Democratic Senator Blumenthal from the Northeast. And so this is something that really impacts all people. In the one case, Democrats tend to look at the monopolistic issues with regard to the social media companies, and the Republicans tend to look at the censorship aspect of it. But Section 230 of the 1996 Communications Act really created. The point was to allow for innovation within the internet, but it also created a beast of its own, which was a lack of accountability. And the question is, one of the most interesting cases, this is related to this, is the recent case of former Alaska Governor Sarah Palin suing the New York Times. She lost her first case, but there's a relation in the question of, if you make an error or an inaccurate statement, can a public official sue you successfully?
Yeah, but the New York Times corrected it immediately.
They did. And it's based upon this Sullivan Supreme Court decision from the 60s, which basically requires actual malice, and there was no malice involved, and that's why. Now the question is, if it goes to appeal, will the judges decide that, well, maybe we've got to take a look at Sullivan anew? This is something that's a little bit scary. It would be new territory, because we've been on the same framework
that would be pivotal
for decades. The way that it relates to Section 230, and I recall cases more than a decade ago of some public officials in some communities that would anonymously criticize other people, and they expected to get away with it. And the question, who is accountable? How can you hold people accountable? And at the end of the day, when you have this Wild West, some have called it a no man's land or a hellscape, or it really is very difficult to control. I was asked during the conversation about, should we censor certain media? It's a slippery slope. It's easy to say I want to censor what I don't like and keep what I like.
Let me be the censor. I'll take care of it. I'll tell you what you ought to read and hear.
But one of the things that I truly believe in is entrusted docents or guides. I'm a big fan of librarians and teachers and others who try to create an experience where both young people and older people can understand the world around them. Because I think we need to continue to learn. Part of the reason why journalists get accused of being liberal now and then is because we're constantly interested in the news. What's new? What's next? What's here? We're not necessarily interested as much in the past.
Got there first, got the scoop.
Right. And maybe we need to be more cognizant of that history, which I think is important. It's important to understand the history of the communities that we live in. But at the same time, we have to help the public understand. We have to help the public come with us. We do have to lead. But at the same time, we can't just race ahead and expect everybody to come after us. And so if we can help people understand the world around them. I will tell you, this is going to sound very trite, but it's very relevant to this conversation. I was at the grocery store a few days ago, went to go buy some chicken breasts. They're $15, 2 of them. Just a few months ago, they had been $8. Really? And I thought to myself, why aren't we having a wider conversation about inflation and the economy? Because on a macro level, the economy looks great. On the micro level, it's very difficult for a lot of people who are trying to make ends meet and who maybe they received a raise. And these are the things that we need to help people understand, rather than say, well, this president is doing better than the last president. How is the quality of life of Americans improving? And how can we as journalists help people understand and make those best decisions?
Absolutely. We're just about out of time. We've got a couple of minutes. I want to ask you the ambush question. We always have to have an ambush question. Looking over the past year, of course, David Plazas, opinion and engagement editor at the Tennessean and the USA Today network in Tennessee, very, very widely read, erudite person who looks at all sides of the issues. What was the most impactful book that you've read in the last year, in the last 12 months?
That is a challenge, because I've had many books that have affected me in different ways, and I have tried to read many books that have nothing to do with my work because of the stress of it. But one of those books actually, and this is related to one of my favorite activities, going to see a play. Before I go see a Shakespearean play, I like to read it, and I hadn't read Midsummer Night's Dream in a long time. And it put me in a really good place, because it put me in a place where you're understanding human relationships in very wonderful and unique ways. And so when I went to go see the play, I had a much better holistic experience. So while it's not necessarily a technical manual or political manual, it was a way to really broaden my brain,
Enlarge
it,
your horizons.
and really fall in love with language again because of how beautiful that English language is.
Oh yeah, great. I think that's one of the most underappreciated virtues we have is sharing the English language.
Yes.
And realizing, like all living languages, it is dynamic. It changes over time. But it's just a wonderful field of study in and of itself. David Plazas, thank you so much. Making a return visit to McMinnville at the Rotary Club of McMinnville. You do us honor by taking this time to be with us. Traveled under not really good traveling conditions today. Really serious weather with flooding and threats of floods. But we appreciate you being here, and do be safe and be cautious on your way back to Nashville. People like you are essential to our society. We want to keep you in good health and keep you functioning at 100%. But thank you, David, for being here.
It's such a pleasure. Thank you for all the work and your leadership as well.
Well, thank you. And I want to thank our listeners at WCPI 91.3. Non-commercial, non-aligned, independent public radio in McMinnville, and BLTV, Community Channel 6, and Kelvin doing the videotaping today. Thank you all. Thank you for being with us, and look forward to seeing you next time. For WCPI and BLTV, this is Bill Zach.